Again, the metaphor that I've been talking about throughout the course, the seed. What happens to a seed if we don't water it, if we don't shed light on it? What happens to that seed is that it withers and dies, and that, unfortunately, is the fate of most human potential, most relationship potential, most countries. And if we want it to grow, if we want it to blossom, we have to shed light on it. We have to water it. This is exactly what Marva Collins did with the seed of greatness that existed in every one of her students. This is what the Pygmalion in the classroom experiment showed, was that when teachers were made to focus on the potential in those individuals who were deemed fast spurters, when they were made to focus on it, to shed light on, when light was shed on their potential, that's when the children grew. That's when they fulfilled much more of their potential. So how do we correct the false schema? What do we do about it? Let me share with you some things on the societal level, some things on the individual level. On the societal level, create good news. Not enough of it around. Now people say, well, it's not marketable, it's boring. Well, okay, a lot of it is not marketable. Part of it because it's the norm, it's the usual. But why not report on the great technical advances that are making lives better? Why not report much more on the great medical advances? Why not report much more on peace and well-being? You know, a situation stops being interesting once there is peace. It's interesting when there's war. Well, why not focus more on these areas? Here is a newspaper that was started online, the Good News Network, that I highly recommend you go on to. Just in the last couple of years it was started. Getting people to focus on what is working. You know, about Albert Einstein, about Cambodia gaining independence on that day in 53. Berlin Wall. You know, focusing, reminding ourselves of historical good as well as on present good. And they have great news where they talk about. Gimundo, another, I don't even know what that means, but another online newspaper that focuses on things that work. Why not start the day with that as well, in addition to opening the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times? Looking at that as well, just to counter the negative schema. Art, so important in creating a better world, in changing our internal schema. I mean, look at the light in Vermeer's, Renaissance artist, in his picture. A light during a time where there was not much light. I mean, consider the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages. But the artists focused on what is working, on the light, on the human potential, and paved the way to the Renaissance. It all started with art. Or the 17th, 18th and 19th century romantics. Beethoven or Victor Hugo. They encountered a harsh reality. But they focused also on the heroic, on the great, on the human potential. Aristotle once said that fiction is more important than history, because history depicts life as it is, whereas fiction depicts life as it can and ought to be. As it can and ought to be. The human potential, and that paved the way to much higher levels of freedom and equality in the world. Or 1930s America, in many ways the heyday of Hollywood, where directors like Cukor, Capra, Sturgis created masterworks during a time when there was a Great Depression. And people used to go to the cinema and watch these films to inspire them and help them get through the difficult time. It was also between the two, you know, the Great War and the Second World War. Difficult time in the world. World recovering and then plunging into another war. And yet the artists continued to inspire. Not ignoring what is not working. Not ignoring, but improving. That, by the way, is my favorite movie, Sullivan's Travels. Modern art as well. Wouldn't it be lovely if we go into a gallery and we feel inspired by the art, whether it's by photography, whether it's by sculpting, whether it's by movies or books? There has to be much more of it. And again, one of the roles of the artist is also to highlight what's not working so that it is improved. But if an artist, if an individual is really concerned about improving the good in the world, it is not enough to only focus and highlight what is not working. Because if we don't highlight the good, if we don't appreciate the good as well, the good depreciates. Positive psychology. This is what it is very much about. Remember, there are two things that positive psychologists do when they study. The first thing that they do is focus on what works. The second thing that they do is focusing on the extraordinary, on the tip of the stem. And by doing that, in the words of Miriam, they democratize excellence. Because they're focusing on the good, not ignoring what works in each individual, not ignoring the extraordinary individuals. The Marva Collins of the world, the resilient kids in at-risk population, and so on. Another reason, in addition to the media, why we tend to ignore the good and focus mostly on the bad is that we adapt. We adapt to what is common, and what drives us, what's interesting to us, is the uncommon, the exception, rather than the rule. And because there is so much more good in the world, it's so much more common, we adapt to it. We stop seeing it after a while. Whereas the bad, the exception, always captures our attention. Why? Because nature created us such that we are change detectors. We're change detectors, and whenever there is a change, our mind immediately goes to that change. Something different that happens. Whether it's something we see or something we hear. For those of you who were asleep. So it's the exception that wakes us up, and that's a good thing. It's a good thing that nature was created that way, because it helps us in case of danger. Because it helps us, for example, hear when there is a lion coming toward us or trying to creep up toward us. It helps us smell poison, something that is different, that changed. It also helps us hear a sleeping baby. It's incredible how this works. Fast asleep, there can be, the house may be falling, you don't get up, but then there is a baby crying and you're up in a second. We're change detectors, and nature has created us such, or God has created us such, so that we can survive better. Now, it's actually a good thing that we adapt on a few levels. First of all, if we didn't adapt, if we were hearing all the noises, we would quite literally go nuts. Because there are so many noises right now going on, in addition to what you're listening to. People typing, people breathing, once in a while car from the outside, and would go crazy if we were always attuned to everything that was going on. So it's good that we adapt. That's why people can live literally on a highway and still fall asleep at night. Because after, a month or so, they stop hearing the cars there. It's like we have relatives out in Concord who live quite literally on top of the train. And we went to visit them for dinner, and a train passes by, and the house shakes, and it's enormous noise. And at the beginning, Tommy and I looked at each other and smiled. And then, second time, the train goes by and the house shakes and huge noise. And, I couldn't help myself. And I said, doesn't that bother you? And they said, what? They didn't know what I was talking. I said, the train just passed. And they said, oh, we don't notice it anymore. Why? Because it passes every half hour or every 20 minutes. They don't notice it. So it's a good thing that we can adapt. Also in terms of difficulties. Personally, the most difficult experience that I endured was on the 19th of September, 19th of December, 1997. I was living in Singapore at the time. My best friend was coming over from Indonesia to visit me. The person who was most important in the world to me at that time. And her plane crashed. Silk Air Flight MI-185. Some of you may remember this. And my world crumbled. For the first time in my life, I felt like I didn't want to go on anymore. I had no energy. And I called up my family, and then I called up another person who has made a lot of difference in my life, Nathaniel Brandon. For various reasons. First of all, Nathaniel Brandon had he's a well-known author and psychologist, had just visited Singapore, had just met Bonnie. And I called him up because he was a psychologist whom I thought could help me, but also because at the age of 45, he lost his wife, who drowned in a pool when she had an epileptic fit, and he found her drowned when he came back home in their pool in their home. So he had been through that about 25 years earlier. So I wanted to talk to him to get his advice, and I was on the phone and could hardly get my words across. I was crying constantly, and he said to me, Tal, what I'm going to tell you now is not going to make sense, but it's true. You're going to get over this. I know you are. We get over losses. It's difficult. It's painful. Cry. Give the emotions their space. But you're going to get over it. We get over painful emotions. We all do. Because if we hadn't, then God help us all. Because if we hadn't, then God help us all. And it took a long time. It was after 3 months that I could start working again. It took a whole year for me to feel some of the bounce, some of the passion for life that I felt before. But now I think about Bonnie, and I smile wistfully, sadly, but I can also appreciate the good times that we had together and the privilege that I had of meeting her. We adapt, and that's a good thing. That's an important thing, because God help us all if we hadn't. There is another side, though, to that equation. There is another side. When we adapt, we also take things for granted. And that's not a good thing. Because we take for granted our family that we care about so much. And we take for granted our friends. And we take for granted the food that we're about to have in the dining hall that's served to us. What a luxury. And we take for granted the person who's sitting next to us. And we take for granted the classes that we take here. Because we adapt. And it's a good thing when it comes to the negatives. It's not such a good thing when we take life for granted. And the question that we need to ask is it possible to have it all? Is it possible to adapt to the negatives, but at the same time not to adapt as much to the positives? You know, there's a story in the Jewish tradition about a man who was living in one of the shtetls, one of the villages in Eastern Europe, and he really had it bad. I mean, he was living in a tiny home with many kids and with a wife who was constantly nagging him. They were constantly fighting, and they're really terrible. And that man wanted to improve his lot, so he went to the rabbi and recounted to him how terrible his life is. He said, look, we're living in a small home. The kids are all over. No privacy whatsoever. My wife nags constantly. Rabbi, help. So the rabbi said, in your yard, do you have chicken? So he said, yes, we have chicken. For the next week, bring the chicken into your home. But Rabbi, what are you talking about? We have no place. Bring the chicken into your home. devout man, believed in his rabbi, brought the chickens for the whole week in the home. Feathers, dirt, stinks, you name it. The kids continue to fight even more. The wife nags, "What are you doing to us here? Our house is small as it is." The rabbi said, and they continue to fight and bicker, and the week finally ends, and he runs to the rabbi and said, "Rabbi, help." And the rabbi says, "How are things going?" He said, "Well, worse. No place at home. We're fighting. It stinks. It's terrible." "My child, do you have a cow in your backyard?" "Yes, Rabbi, we have a cow." "Well, bring her into the house in addition to the chickens for the week." "Rabbi, just do it." So he brings in the cow, and again, it's awful, and it stinks to the nth degree, and and they don't even sleep for the whole week, and it's terrible. And by the end of the week, he's looking terrible, disheveled, he stinks. He goes to the rabbi and says, "Rabbi, help, situation is terrible." "Yes, it's so much worse." "Do you have a horse in your backyard?" "Yes, Rabbi, we do." By now understanding the pattern here, "Take the horse and bring it into your house." So he takes the horse, brings it into the house, and it's awful. The horse is kicking and yelling and jumping and breaks stuff, and there is mess and chaos and bickering and so much worse. And finally the week ends. He runs to the rabbi, and the rabbi says, "How are you doing?" "Rabbi, it's terrible, it's awful." "Okay, for the next week, why don't you take out all the animals and come and see me then?" And at the end of the week, he comes there and the rabbi says, "How are things going?" "Rabbi, it's wonderful. We have so much place. The smell is so good. We're getting along now like we hadn't ever before. The kids are happy. Thank you so much, Rabbi." Now here is the question. Do things need to get worse before we appreciate what's right in front of us and all around us? When do we begin to appreciate our health? When do we begin to appreciate our health? When something goes wrong with us or with someone else. When do we begin to appreciate life? When ours is in danger or when we lose someone dear to us. And the question that we need to ask ourselves is, must something external, extraordinary, and usually tragic happen for us to appreciate the ordinary? You see, there are treasures of happiness all around us and within us. Right next to us, in the dining hall, sitting next to you here, in your room, at home. There are wonderful things, things worthy of appreciation all around us and within us. But we take them for granted. Do we need to wait? Do we need to wait for that? And the answer is no. No, if we learn gratitude as a way of life. If we cultivate the habit of gratitude. And just as the media has cultivated the fault-finding, we can cultivate benefit-finding. We can cultivate grateful, because when we're grateful for something, we no longer take it for granted. G.K. Chesterton. You say grace before meals. All right, but I say grace before the concert and the opera, and grace before the play and pantomime, and grace before I open a book, and grace before sketching, painting, swimming, fencing, boxing, walking, playing, dancing, and grace before I dip the pen in the ink. Gratitude produced the most purely joyful moments that have been known to man. Think about it. Think about the last time you were grateful to someone. And you expressed that gratitude. How did you feel? And how did you make that other person feel? Or when someone was grateful to you, appreciated you, you were walking on air. It created this upward spiral as a result. When it's genuine, when it's real. We don't do enough of it. We don't do enough appreciation. We don't express gratitude enough. Whether it's to the food that we eat, whether it's to writing that we do, whether it's for our friends or family. This is one of the most wonderful books written about the power of gratitude. It's not a research book, but a lot of these ideas, and as I'll talk about in a minute, have been researched. About gratitude by Brother David Steindl Rast. He also has a great website if you Google his name. How do we cultivate gratitude? His advice is simple and gracious. Why not start by surveying a typical day? What is it you tend to tackle with spontaneous mindfulness? Without an effort, your whole heart is in it. Maybe it's the first cup of coffee in the morning, the way it warms you and wakes you up, or taking your dog for a walk, or giving a little child a piggyback ride. It is a matter of practice, of doing it over and over again, till it becomes second nature, till it becomes a habit, till we take a state of gratitude and turn it into a gratitude trait. And it is possible to do it. One of the ways to do it is to identify every day just one or two things to do mindfully, to focus on them. Whether it's the first cup of coffee in the dining hall, whether it's the walk to class, whether it's 10 minutes in the afternoon where you just listen to the music in your room by yourself with your eyes closed and focused, appreciating your favorite piece. Taking our time, just become wine connoisseurs, but also life connoisseurs. This course in many ways is about life appreciation. He continues, gratefulness is the measure of our aliveness. Are we not dead to whatever we take for granted? Surely to be numb is to be dead. Think about this. So Irvin Yalom, Stanford psychiatrist, did a lot of research on terminally ill patients. He went to people who had 3 months, 6 months, up to a year to live, and researched this population. And what he found time and again is that these people, time and again, were saying something to the effect of, for the first time in my life, I feel that I'm alive. For the first time in my life, I feel that I'm alive. Why? Because for the first time, I appreciate breathing. For the first time in many years, I appreciate my husband, my wife, my friend, my children, a flower, the grass, a conversation. For the first time of my life, I appreciate it. Whereas before, the focus was just not there. It was on other things, on the difficulties and the hardships, and mostly on the negative. And remember, as far as you're concerned, the children on the bus did not exist. As far as most people are concerned, the good things in their lives, in their relationships, do not exist. Because when we're not grateful for them, when we take them for granted, as far as we're concerned, they're not there. And then we're numb to these things. We're dead to these things. And he takes a wake-up call, like a terminal disease, to wake us up, to get us to focus on what is right inside us and all around us all the time. Why? Why wait? Why wait? There's a lot of research on the value of gratitude. You read one of, or will be reading one of the articles by Robert Emmons and Michael McCullough from UC Davis. Let me summarize the two studies there into one. So what they did was essentially take a random group of people and divide them into 4 groups. First group, every night before going to bed, write at least 5 things for which you're grateful. Big things or little things. Second group, write at least 5 hassles in your life. 5 bad things that happened to you. Third group, write about at least 5 things that you're better than others at, superior to others. And the fourth group, control group, write about anything that happened to you during the day. The outcome measures that they looked at was optimism, happiness, physical health, how often they visited the doctor over the 6 months of the study, one of the studies, how generous and benevolent they were toward other people, and finally, how likely they were to achieve their goals that they set for themselves. In other words, how successful they were. The group that performed the worst was the hassles group. 5 bad things that happened to you. The group that performed at best, that was happiest, most optimistic, most likely to achieve their goals, most generous and benevolent toward other people, and healthiest was the group that every night before going to bed wrote at least 5 things for which they were grateful, both psychological and health benefits. The study was in many ways one of the first studies that they conducted. A book just came out recently called Thanks by Robert Emmons, which is wonderful and traces through a lot more studies and research and exercises that you can do to become more grateful, to have gratitude as a way of life. Physiological benefits such as our heart variability, which is a predictor of longevity, which is a predictor of health, is increased. The parasympathetic system increases when we're grateful, and that induces calm, and that strengthens our immune system. There are also many benefits to trait gratefulness. It's not just a state of being. It's also about a trait. How do we cultivate that? How do we cultivate that? By doing it over and over again. I do this every night. I've been doing it since the 19th of September, 1999. Since the 19th of September, 1999, I've been doing it. I've been doing it long before the 2002 study. I started doing it when Oprah told me to do it. Really. And I've been doing it ever since. Let me share with you what I wrote about last night. Was it 26th last night? Yeah. Okay. So, God, family, Tamush, my love, my wife, yoga, I did yoga, David, so wonderful, Shirel, precious, my 2 children, office hours, I had office hours yesterday that I enjoyed a lot, beep, sorry, another beep, sorry, some censorship in this class is important. It took you a while, but okay. Beep. No, just kidding about this one. And Tommy's soup. She made this unbelievable pea soup, which I had yesterday. You know, big things and little things. Big things and little things. And here are other things that I'm grateful for right now. I'm grateful for Sean Acor, the head teacher of the class. I'm grateful for his work, for his inspiration. I'm grateful to Deb, the head TF of the other class. I'm grateful to the teaching fellows who are investing so much time in your education, in your happiness, in this course. I'm grateful to Barry, who's there behind the scenes, but is responsible for so much of what's happening, for his support, for how humble he is doing all that. And I'm grateful for my students, because there wouldn't be a class. I wouldn't be here today doing what I love to do and what I care about most if you weren't here. So thank you. I'm grateful. Now, the key with this is to do it as a way of, yes, is it cheesy? Absolutely. Does it make a difference? Absolutely. You know, every night I also do it with my kid. And how do I do it? I ask David, he's 3.5 years old, what was fun for you today? And he tells me, and then he asks me, what was fun for you today? I found it from a friend of mine, who hand worker, who was here just a couple of classes ago visiting, and I came over for dinner one day, and he heard me speak about this, and he said, I want to show you something. And he has 2 young kids, and they were standing and talking about the 5 grateful things for which they were grateful. These were young kids, you know, Daniel and Maya, and I looked at it and I started to cry. It was so moving and so touching, and I've been doing it ever since with my kids. My wife and I do it on a regular basis. She puts up with my cheesiness. It helps, it works, because we don't take the good things in our lives for granted. The key when we do this is to maintain freshness. How do we maintain freshness? One of the things that happens with this exercise is that it very often becomes a habit, and we lose it. We lose the freshness of it, we lose the mindfulness of it, and we just take it for granted as an exercise. And the key is, one of the things that Lubomirsky says is, well, try do it once a week, and for some people, it's actually better than doing it every day. However, there's also a price. It's much less likely to be a trait if we only do it once a week. So how do we maintain freshness doing it every single day? How do we maintain freshness? Well, fortunately, there's a lot of research on this topic, some of it by Lubomirsky as well as by others. The first thing is introduce variety. So let's say I write about Shirel, and there are some things that I write about every day. It's Shirel, my daughter, it's David, my son, it's Tommy, my wife, and it's God. I write about these things every single day, and then I write about other things as well. I can write about different aspects of these things. So one day I can write about Shirel's smile, her beautiful 1-year-old toothless smile. And another day I can write about the fact that she's taking her first steps now. So vary. Or one day I can write about one week focus about my work, another week can be mostly focused about personal things. And so on. Variety really is the spice of life. Makes a difference here. Second, Ellen Langer talks about mindfulness. She defines mindfulness as creating novel distinctions, which is similar to creating variety. Looking at things that I haven't seen before, that I haven't looked at before. This is also a way to maintain love. People talk about how, over time you adapt to your relationships. Well, there's something new to discover about a person every time, whether it's about my parents, whether it's about my lover, whether it's about my friends. Creating novel distinctions, looking at it mindfully, focusing on it, and maintaining freshness through this focus. Visualizing it. Stephen Coslin from William James Hall, head of our department, did research showing that kids actually visualize most words. So when let's say they say mother, immediately the picture of mother comes up. Whereas very often for us, when we talk, these words are automatic. We no longer visualize it, which is why it takes kids longer to think, because they're still visualizing the words. It's not automatic anymore. Which also explains why kids live like kids, why they're able to appreciate the simplest of things, to be mesmerized and blown away by an airplane up there, or when they talk about what they did at daycare. They live like children. And what we have become over the years, we adapted to it, and we've become numb to a lot of these things. So one of the ways to chip away this numbness, one of the ways to do it is to visualize. And when we visualize, we start to see things once again like kids do. Next time we'll continue with this, but I want to end today by sharing a story with you. A story about the person who, to me, more than anyone else, captures what a benefit finder is. A person who's my role model when it comes to focusing also on the good. My grandmother was born in 1915 in Sighet, Romania. She had a very regular childhood. She was the youngest daughter of 7, 1 more sister, 5 more brothers. And they were doing well. Many of her brothers became important rabbis, violinists, musicians. And she was a young girl, happy, living the normal life until 1940, which was when Hitler invaded Romania. Hitler invaded Romania, and her life changed radically. Her entire family was taken to one concentration camp after the other, ending up in Auschwitz. In Auschwitz, she had over a dozen nieces and nephews were all murdered. Her 5 brothers and parents were murdered in front of her very eyes. At the end of the war, somehow she and her sister survived. The British came to Auschwitz to liberate the prisoners. And when they came in with a doctor, and the doctor would go through the prisoners. Most of them were, of course, dead. Those who were alive, he would say, take that person, leave that person here, because they had limited resources, limited places. Those prisoners whom they thought would not survive, they left them there. And he comes to my grandmother, who weighed at the time 26 kilos, which is 54 pounds. My grandmother was a large woman, 54 pounds, and said, leave. And then he saw her sister, who was right next to her, who weighed 36 kilos, 79 pounds, and he said, he made this motion to put her on the truck. And of course she was too weak to get up, so the British soldiers picked up my grandmother's sister. His name was Shindy. They picked Shindy up, and Shindy held on to her sister, and she wouldn't let go. And they tried to open her grip, and even though she was weak and sick, they couldn't open her grip. So the doctor said, fine, take them both. So they took them both, and they put them on the truck, and they were, of course, certain that my grandmother would die. A month passed, and she survived, though she didn't put on a single gram. Any day they thought she would die, but she refused to die. After 3 months, she started putting on weight. She survived. 6 months later, she went back to Sighet to see what remained from her home. She arrived there, got off the cart with a horse, and a man by the name of Joseph, Yossi, saw her. And he saw a woman who was stooped, who was skinny, who still had no hair. But he recognized those eyes, because those eyes were proud, and those eyes were alive. And he recognized Goldie. And he took her with him. And 2 weeks later, they got married. And Goldie got better, and got pregnant, and gave birth to a stillborn. And she got pregnant again, and once again gave birth to a stillborn. They made their way to Tel Aviv from Romania, and they were caught by the British. There was a British mandate at that time. They were caught by the British and sent back to a concentration camp in Cyprus. And there, in the concentration camp, my grandmother in Cyprus had another baby, a baby girl, who survived. And then they had another boy who was stillborn, and my grandmother could have no more children. Her body had just endured too much. My grandmother survived and thrived, as did Shindy. Shindy could have no children, but my mother was her child too, and I was her grandchild as well. And I remember this was in October of 1988, a few years earlier, and we went to the cemetery on the day that she passed away to say some prayers over her tombstone. And I went with my grandmother, and we walked there, and my grandmother stood in front of the tombstone, and on the tombstone were engraved not just Shindy's name, but the name of all the brothers and her parents. And she looked at the tombstone and started to talk to Shindy and said to her, "We're so fortunate, aren't we? We're so lucky, aren't we? Look, Talik is here." She called me Talik. And then she told her what I was doing, and she told her what my brother and sister were doing, their grandchildren, and about my mother and father and how wonderful things were. And she was talking about the wonderful things, and she was crying once in a while, missing Shindy. She was so human, just standing there and talking half in Yiddish, half in Hebrew, once in a while talking to me and to her sister who saved her life. And then she said to me, "Let's go." And we walked together, thousands of tombs around us. We walked along the path toward the car. It was a beautiful October day. The sun was out, the wind was blowing. The trees were swaying, and she suddenly stopped. She stopped and looked up, and she stood so proud, so poised, and she held my hand so tight, looking up and then looking at me. She said, "Tal, it's such a beautiful world. Just a pity we have to leave." And she smiled, and we walked. My grandmother saw thousands of corpses. She saw her family murdered in front of her very eyes. She had 3 stillborn children. She did not ignore the terrible things in life. How could she? However, at the same time, she also refused to ignore the good things in life, the wonderful things in life. And she was grateful, and she survived. My grandmother told me that this is a beautiful world. I believe her. Thank you.